Thank you very much. I would just like to ask the technicians to put on my presentation as well. Yes. So thank you very much for inviting me to this. I agree very much with my predecessor, very interesting conference where I have also learned a lot, although I only participated this morning in the conference. And my topic continues the previous presentation in a way of looking at the possible arrangements that will be included in the potential, still at this moment, Ukrainian membership in the European Union. So I would like to discuss a little bit the possible exemptions, transitionary periods that might be included in the final agreement. So why am I talking about this issue? Because unlike what was perhaps originally envisaged for the European Union to become and for its European legal order, and that was for the order to be uniformly applicable across all EU member states. And in this context, perhaps I should mention the judgment of the Court of Justice, now Court of Justice of the European Union, in the case of Commission versus Italy in 1972, where the court held that the attainment of the objectives of the community at that time requires that the rules of community law are fully applicable at the same time and with identical effects over the whole territory of the community without the member states being able to place any obstacles in the way. So since 1972, we have witnessed a lot of very different arrangements, agreements, exceptions, transitionary periods, adaptations that were actually introduced for individual states that were joining the European Union. And these allowed for flexible integration pathways without the need to immediately fulfill all the criteria required by the European Union legal order. So the question is, will this apply to Ukraine as well? And if so, and it seems that this will be the case, to what extent and in which areas? Of course, Ukraine is, given its current situation and the ongoing armed conflict, in a very specific situation. It's facing very unique challenges, as my predecessor already explained. And there will be serious investments needed also in the post-conflict phase in terms of its reconstruction. So what am I talking about when I'm referring to various exemptions and transitional periods relevant as integration mechanisms? The idea is that this will allow for certain balancing flexibility with, of course, still the ultimate goal of the new member state being able to fully comply with the EU acquis communautaire. So exemptions should in principle allow a country to temporarily or conditionally avoid complying with certain EU law requirements. They are sometimes referred to also as adaptations. We will see that this is also the language used in the Ukraine's negotiating framework adopted on the 21st of June this year. They are typically rare as, of course, as I said, EU aims at uniform application of its legal order across the membership, but they can be granted for practical reasons, especially where complete adjustments would require significant economic or structural efforts on the side of the new joining member state. Transitional periods give new or potential member states extra time to fulfill some requirements under the EU acquis, allowing for so-called phased approach to compliance. This again helps the state to prepare in time, both economically, administratively, institutionally, in order to meet all the requirements without excessive burdens for the state at the entry point, so to say, to the European Union membership. These approaches of exemptions, adaptations, transitional periods were used in practice in previous accessions, for example, especially concerning the Central Central and Eastern Europe, and in various areas, as you probably know very well, since you're coming, some of you, from those countries. So where could we expect potential application of these exceptions, adaptations, and transitory periods in the case of Ukraine? Probably particularly those concerning the energy sector and environmental regulations, judicial and anti-corruption reforms, although if we look at the negotiating framework, we see a lot of emphasis on respect for fundamentals of the European Union, and Article 2 of the treaty was already mentioned several times. If you look at the text of negotiating framework and the decision, this is emphasized over and over again that this will be the essential precondition for the integration of a new state into the European Union. And what is also very interesting, that it is extremely explicitly emphasized the possibility of reversibility. So that in the case that in any of the clusters that the Ukraine, in this case, has to fulfill, there will be a detected backsliding, that then also it might be possible to adopt certain reversible decisions that will reverse the process of the candidate. And then perhaps also we can expect that Ukraine might need some adjustments in the agricultural sector in order to meet eventually all the requirements of the EU law. Now, I would say that many of the challenges, and perhaps before going to this, I wanted to read out to you what is currently stated in the negotiating framework, and particularly here I would refer you to paragraphs from 27 onwards. And here it is says that in order to fully comply with the EU acquis, Ukraine may exceptionally be entitled to certain transitional measures, which must be defined during the accession negotiations, and that any provisions of the association agreement, including the deep and comprehensive free trade area, which depart from the acquis, cannot be considered as precedents in the accession negotiations. So we see here this divorce from what was agreed for the association agreement phase. And then, paragraph 28, where necessary, specific adaptations to the acquis will be agreed on the basis of the principles, criteria, and parameters inherent in the acquis as applied by the member states when adopting that acquis and taking into consideration the specificities of Ukraine. So some specific adaptations are obviously already envisaged from the start. And then the Union may agree to request from Ukraine for transitional measures provided they are limited in time and scope and accompanied by a plan with clearly defined stages for application of the acquis. So, very clear plan how these transitionary periods will actually really be limited in time and will not become a permanent feature of the EU membership in the European, of the Ukrainian membership in the European Union. And then it says, for areas linked to the extension of the internal market, regulatory measures should be implemented quickly and transition periods should be short and few. So already a warning, when it comes to internal market, we should not interpret this possibility of transitional measures too broadly. And where considerable adaptations are necessary, requiring substantial effort, including large financial outlays, appropriate transitional arrangements can be envisaged as part of an ongoing, detailed, and budgeted plan for alignment. In any case, transitional arrangements must not involve amendments to the rules or policies of the Union, disrupt their proper functioning, or lead to significant distortions of competition. Nothing surprising here, obviously, this is the core of the European Union acquis. Transitional measures may also be agreed in the interest of the Union. And this is a very interesting part, because so far it was usual that the new candidate countries, the states that were entering the European Union, would be entitled to certain exceptions because they need to, adjust, let's say, and prepare for the full membership. But here we see an emphasis on perhaps the need of the European Union to introduce certain transitional measures. And it says, appropriate transition periods, derogations, specific arrangements, or safeguard clauses may be considered. The Commission will include these as appropriate in its draft EU common positions to close the relevant chapters for areas such as, and here no surprise, freedom of movement of workers, structural policies, and/or agriculture. So these are the areas where the European Union wishes to, let's say, safeguard its interests against the new member state. Transitional arrangements or safeguards should be reviewed regarding their impact on competition or the functioning of the internal market. And then paragraph 30 says, detailed technical adaptations to the acquis will not need to be fixed during the accession negotiations. So, and this is another, let's say, open clause, because it requires determination of what is the technical adaptation and what is the substantive one, which needs to be agreed in advance. Because these technical, so-called technical adaptations will be prepared in cooperation with Ukraine and adopted by the Union institutions in good time with a view to their entry into force on the date of accession. So it will be interesting to follow to see what falls in which category. And then there are also two remaining paragraphs, 31, which deals with economic and monetary union, again a separate regime for EU, and the other one of the Schengen acquis, again not applied immediately and only subject to the decision of the EU institutions that the Union, that the Ukraine is actually ready. So, how to address all the challenges and obstacles that a state like Ukraine, especially given its current situation being fully immersed in an ongoing armed conflict, how can they perhaps overcome all these very specific challenges in a timely manner so that they will be ready to integrate into the European Union? Perhaps with the assistance of the new technologies, new and emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence. And there are various ways how these technologies could be employed, especially artificial intelligence. Of course, I'm not speaking of artificial intelligence that is fully autonomous without the control of the humans. So I would always encourage whoever is thinking about introducing these technologies to ensure that human remains in the loop, not just on the loop or outside the loop, but really in the loop, in order to control that all these technological advancements are human-centric, so that this digital uplift is human-centric. Nevertheless, there are various ideas, how they can be implemented. For example, as you know, every state before joining the European Union has to translate all the EU acquis in the national language or languages. In case of Ukraine, that would also be relevant. And with the use now of these new translation tools, that could go much, much faster than what was the case of previous enlargements of the European Union. Then also, in order to ensure compliance with domestic law with the acquis communautaire, artificial intelligence applications could be extremely useful. Again, subject to monitoring of experts who are well versed on these issues. And in fact, I was recently approached by a colleague from a German university whether I would be interested in forming a consortium of partners to apply for one of the EU projects together with colleagues from Ukraine, because as you know, Ukraine is already entitled to participate in many EU-funded programs, projects, and so on, horizons, in order to actually work on developing these AI applications that would speed up Ukrainians, let's say, tasks required for preparation for the fulfillment of all the obligations according to this negotiating framework. So there are certain benefits, of course, increased efficiency in preparation process, perhaps also transparency, reduced costs, less expertise needed domestically with the assistance of also experts from the outside, but also risks because it might lead to, legally speaking, perfectly aligned domestic legal environment, so everything will be compatible with the EU legal order, but we will eventually lack sufficient proficiency among domestic actors that would have to implement this aligned legal order, and that could then possibly lead to, problems or challenges in full implementation. So what are comparative insights and strategic considerations if we compare to the previous enlargement processes of the European Union? As I said, we are dealing with a unique situation. Ukraine is now currently in an armed conflict situation, and there will be significant reconstruction needs involved. And it is to be expected, and this is why I was emphasizing so much these technical adjustments. Perhaps there will be a need for more flexibility and responsiveness to Ukraine's immediate needs when dealing with these issues. So a balance will have to be struck between, on the one hand, full compliance with what the new, yesterday confirmed in the Parliament, Commissioner for EU Enlargement, Marta Ko, said EU DNK, DNA, yes, I'm sorry, I was looking for the right acronym, DNA. She said this is extremely important, that all future enlargements will be fully compatible with the EU's DNA. So we will perhaps see more flexibility when it comes to the situation of Ukraine. Also, we can expect that there will be a continuation of increased support, perhaps a bit imbalanced if we compare it to the other candidate countries in terms of also financial means that will be designated for this purpose. And here again the questions of equity, fairness might be raised, why just one country receiving so much support and not the others. And perhaps we will see also a little bit more lenient monitoring over the compliance with the EU requirements. Nevertheless, as I was saying earlier, there is a very clear message in the framework that before any future enlargement happens, there will be very serious scrutiny of achieving the necessary, let's say, threshold, and there might even be some reversed tactics employed should the goals not be met at the point where there will be a final decision on the accession. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.